Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the old masturbator, Scott Bradfield, the old masturbator's parakeet, Dodo the parakeet, and we're here reading great books in the bathtub, which is what we do. We don't understand the books. We don't have anything clever to say about the books. We just read them in the bathtub. That's all we do. And we're going to put a link below to an essay I just published today in the New Republic about a book I was looking forward to reviewing, and I heard about this and I asked to do it. Chekhov Becomes Chekhov. It's by Bob Blaisdell, and it's Dodie. You can keep it down a little bit, keep it to yourself. Bob Blaisdell. I only knew his name because he published a couple of essays I'd read in the Los Angeles Review of Books, and I remember liking one of them because it was several years ago now. He basically published a sort of a defense of Constance Garnett. We talked about this, I think, in the past. And when I was about 14 or 15, I read all these cheap paperbacks of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov particularly. And almost all of them, and Turgenev, they were almost all translated by Constance Garnett. She was just kind of this big champion of Russian literature. And about 15, 16, I'd read all these books. And about the time I'd read many of her books and just thought she was the best translator of her, just because she and David Magershak and Andrew R. McAndrew. I remember those three names kept coming up. I just thought they were the best because I knew of them. Oh, there's a little bird poo. There you go. You don't get that. You don't get that in other book TV. You don't get that in book TV shows. You know, I was going to blow my nose with that tissue, but instead I picked up some parakeet poo off my shoulder. So I read all these, and then I started hearing from people I'd met or people I read how everyone thought Constance Garnett was a terrible translator. She had a really bad reputation among possibly deservedly. I have no idea. I just liked reading her translations. That's all. And she was considered not very good. And so Blaisdell wrote this essay in the Los Angeles Review of Books. Basically, I liked it. I said, this guy's really smart because he likes Constance Garnett and so do I. So that's all. Immediately I said, he must be a smart guy because he likes the same translator I do. And it was a good essay. It was kind of no nonsense, straightforward. He's basically he's kind of a bathing buddy, even though we don't know him personally, but he kind of takes this same approach that we sort of take to books. And this book is definitely a bathtub type book. So he's an academic, I believe. He may be a professor, I don't know, and he's written this book, which is basically just reading through everything Chekhov produced over 2 years, 1886 to 1887. And he just basically reads through it and tells us what the books and stories are about. And he quotes quite substantially from all the stories. So it's almost like reading along with Bob Blaisdell about these stories. And he doesn't say anything super clever about them. I'm sorry, I don't think it's a super clever book. There's no critical jargon in it at all. So he never deconstructs anything or socially analyzes anything or talks about the metonymic quality of, prose or metaphor or anything. It's just not a single talk about it. It's just what happens in the stories and then what was going on in Chekhov's life. So he also talks about his letters quite a bit. And it's a really nice, pleasant soak. And what I did when I was reading it, because I always look at these reviews, writing essays as a basic excuse to read writers I kind of want to read, is I downloaded at one point because I couldn't find a lot of the stories. Most of the stories published in those 2 years are not commonly reprinted. So most of us know Chekhov through much of the later work. There's a few occasional early stories that get reprinted, but most of the late stories like Ward 6 and Peasants and 3 Years and a boring story, one of the great stories of love, of unrequited love, all of those great long novella-length stories that he wrote while he was becoming a successful playwright, those are the ones you know, but many of these early stories are not reprinted. Even though they are collected, you can find many of them in, again, the Constance Garnett collected Chekhov that came around the turn of the century. I've been picking these up over the years. This is one of the volumes. It's called The Witch and Other Stories. These are all translated first by Constance Garnett. And anyway, these very early short stories, some of which aren't even included in this collected edition, were available, and I looked all over, and the only one I could find that was kind of easy to find was Complete Works of Anton Chekhov, and it's the Delphi Classics. We rarely promote ebooks on this show. We talked about the very good translation. There's a very good. Bill Johnson did the translation of Solaris, which was only available on ebooks at one point, and this is only available on ebook. And it's a huge, bite-wise, page-wise, it's huge. It has every story that is in public domain. Some stories have never been translated, and some are not in public domain. Most of them are translated by Constance Garnett, and has all the plays. I don't think it has any correspondence. Some essays, the one novel of his, The Shooting Party, which I've never read actually, and it's just all the stuff there. Now, not only do they have all the stories, they have a couple hundred stories on this, but you can actually click the table of contents to have the stories appear either chronologically or alphabetically, because it's hard to find a lot of these stories. There's so many of them, and so many of them are only 2 or 3, 4 pages. So I looked at these. I clicked it to chronological, and I just kind of read along with Blaisdell through many of these stories, that some of which I'd read and many of which I hadn't. And I talk about some of the stories in the essay you'll find below here. A couple of the stories I talked about ended up getting cut from the piece because it got too long. Clear Mountain Water, Cruel Light of Day. This is the non-tech edition. Non-tech decade, for those who are living on a planet on the other side of Mars who don't know about it. Non-tech decade. We're I don't know. Oh yeah, so some of these stories I'd read and some I hadn't. One of them was a story called A Letter, and I believe Tolstoy really loved this story, and I've read it a few times over the years. And I do love this story. It's very, very perfect, kind of typical Chekhov. It's about a kind of journeyman priest who goes to see his Monsignor or his Cardinal or whoever his boss is in the priest hierarchy, because his son is living. I think his son is living with a married woman, and he doesn't know what to do. And what the older priest tells him is, you need to lecture him. You need to teach him to be good. You must write him a reproving letter telling him what a bad boy he's been and how he's sinful and he's going to go to hell and all that stuff. And so the younger priest says, well, will you help me? And the older priest says, okay, I'll help you write the letter. He writes this letter full of fire and brimstone. You got to really shape up, kid. You're really a bad boy. I'm ashamed of you, blah, blah, blah. In the course of this conversation, there's another priest who's been sitting in the room. He's an old, corrupt old guy. He's a drunk. He's a lecher. He goes around taking money to perform illegal marriages between people who shouldn't be married, probably divorced people or people who are already married. He's just basically a corrupt old scoundrel, one of those characters that shows up a lot in Chekhov. And he leaves with the younger priest at the end of this letter writing. And he says, you got to throw that letter away. And the young priest is so proud. He had this letter's been written by this high mucky muck. He says, oh, I'm so proud it's been written by him to help me save my son. And the corrupt old priest says, throw it away. Give your son a break. If his father can't forgive him, who will? It's a line I'd never forget. And the priest goes, well, no, but I should. And he feels conflicted now. He was so proud of this letter. He goes home. I won't tell you the end of the story, but it's such a lovely story that Chekhov's affection for scoundrels and for the priest who wants to teach his son a lesson. He feels affection for both of them, and it comes through in the story. There's another story I didn't get a chance to talk about called, I think, The Dependents. This is a story of many of the stories that I read along with Blaisdell, which I had never read before, and which just terrific little stories. I talked about the beggar in this, and The Dependents is about an old man. I think he's got a dog and a horse. It's been a while since I've read it now. And he really likes to take care of them. You know how we all like to take care of things, like our stupid parakeet, and take care of your partners and your family. You want to take care of people, and he wants to take care of his dog and his horse. And he's poor, and he can't afford to feed them anymore, and he can't afford to feed himself. And he goes around trying to find new homes for them or find ways of feeding them. And he's so distraught, and he's so horrified to watch them in hunger, he decides to have them slaughtered. Takes them to a butcher. This is a horrifically disturbing, upsetting story that's also kind of funny and makes you want to cry. I'll never forget the story. I think at Blaisdell, I talked about it in the original draft of this essay, because he says, if you love animals, it's a hard story to read, and it is. But all of the stories, I must have read 150, 70, 75, 50, I can't remember now. A lot a lot of these stories, most of which I'd never read before, and I would say all of them were worth reading. They were much, quote, lighter, but they all had that same deep, dark kind of richness that you get in Chekhov. So anyway, it was a great opportunity to do that. Reading along with Blaisdell's fun because he doesn't do any sort of clever arty farty stuff like we do, and he just basically talks what he likes to read in the bathtub. So it's this is kind of a perfect bathtub book. If you want, we don't, and it also talks about his life over those 2 years. So I really strongly recommend it. If you find these old Constance Garnett editions, they're kind of fun to have, but you can get everything on that Delphi edition. And I haven't seen many errors in it. Again, I don't look that closely, and I've got a couple other Delphi editions, but I get the feeling they're fairly well handled. So you correct me, I'm maybe wrong as usual. But I do. The Chekhov is definitely worth having just for all the available stories, and there are a lot of stories, so you can keep them together. I mentioned this before too. One of the best biographies I've ever read, Ernest K. Simmons. He really does bring across this affection for Chekhov. I use that quite a bit in my piece. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. We've really enjoyed this Chekhov. We'll be talking about Chekhov over the years and going back to the Delphi edition, I'm sure. But I can't for $1.99. It's got to be the best deal on the interweb. And this is worth checking out too. Your local library, maybe you pick it up yourself if you just want to read a kind of bathtub critical. It's a critical book for bathtubs. Okay, happy bathing. Stay safe.